The People's Democratic Party in Edo State is challenging the result of the Edo State Governorship election, in which the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, declared that the All Progressives Congress candidate, Senator Monday Okpebholo, is the winner. Now, the executive director of TAP Initiative, Martins Obono, has alleged that INEC actively participated in rigging the polls. Now, INEC had declared Okpebholo the winner with 291,667 votes, while Dr. Asue Ighodalo of the People's Democratic Party was said to have come second with 247,274 votes. Some civil society organizations which monitored the election also faulted the outcome, declaring that the results from the several polling units were altered at collation centers. Now, joining me on the program this evening to discuss this is Suala Jumbo, is the promoter of the Nigerian Intellectuals Forum, joins me virtually from Parakat, Rivers State. Thank you for your time, Suala.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Let me start by saying that I understand that you were part of the team that did research into the outcome of the just concluded election in Edo State. And you and your team had some misgivings, some reservations. I would like you to speak more on that, even though we know that you worked with TAP Initiative, to sort of come up with some revealing findings. Can you bring us up to speed? What did you discover?
Yes, well, just to clear, I didn't work with TAP Initiative. Our research was mainly on the Bayelsa gubernatorial elections that were held in the previous cycle. However, there are some similarities, from what's occurring or what we hear is occurring in Edo State, to what's occurred in Bayelsa. And so I can throw some light on, some of the things that we noticed, that happened in Bayelsa, and then the effect it seems to also be having on the Edo State elections.
Okay, so what similarities would you say you discovered?
Now, the first point to note is that during the Bayelsa, Imo, and Kogi elections, which were held at about the same time, the BVAS machine that was used by INEC, was configured in a way that the machine was able to report how many voters were accredited per polling units in real time. So what that means is that at the end of the elections, as the BVAS machine is transmitting the results from each polling unit to the IREV, where the public can view those results, it was also transmitting the number of accredited voters in the particular polling unit. Now, unfortunately, and for whatever reason, what we noticed is that during the Edo elections, that feature or that function was disabled, and therefore you could not compare the result sheets that were coming out from the polling units with the number of voters that were accredited in that polling unit. Now, let me explain it this way. Now, during the Bayelsa elections, we all know that the BVAS has three or two specific functions. The first is the accreditation that by the BVAS when the voter goes to the polling unit and presents his card or his face is captured. That's the first function that everyone knows. The second function is that at the end of the voting in the polling unit, the BVAS machine is used to take a photograph of the result in that polling unit, which is uploaded immediately to IREV. Now, there's a third function of BVAS that is not commonly known by a majority of the populace, and which is the ability of the BVAS machine to actually transmit the number of voters, the number of cards that passed through that machine. In other words, the number of persons that are acquitted in that particular polling unit at that election. Now, what this does is that it gives a side-by-side snapshot, of result sheet, as well as the accreditation figure coming from that polling unit. And therefore, in a place like Bayelsa, what we notice is that in some polling units, you will see the machine reporting, for instance, 49 people were accredited. But when you open the result sheet that was uploaded to IREV, you will see 1,200 people accredited. And therefore, at a glance, you can tell that there's something wrong with that result, and the result is obviously fraudulent. Now, one would expect that that technology would have been carried over to the Edo State elections, but we noticed that that was not used. And then we hear these reports, of some of the results from Edo State, seeming to have bogus figures like some of the ones we noticed in Bayelsa State.
And let me go through what, of course, the phases of electronic voting entails, because we know that since that act, of course, was signed in, electronic voting was hoped to sort of make the process more transparent and credible. Now, the 4 phases, the first phase having to do with building a robust biometric register of voters. And then the next phase is a track towards full electronic voting, of course, has to do with the electronic accreditation of voters. And then there's also the phase of the voting, through electronic balloting. And then the 4th phase, which is final, is the transmission and collation of results. Now, all of this process, of course, in theory, seems fantastic, which is aimed at sort of boosting the credibility of the process. But it somehow appears there seems to be glitches. We don't seem to get it right. Even though I know that recently, I was at a gathering where INEC actually did say that the IREV is not a collation center. So I would like you to speak on where you feel we haven't really gotten it right.
Well, for me, I think the technology as it stands today is relatively good. I wouldn't say perfect, but I think it's good. I think that somewhere in between, the problem lies with the human operators. Now, just like I described earlier, if the machine itself is reporting that so number of people were accredited on that day, then one would expect that the result sheet would also be reporting similar. In other words, that the distribution of votes to all the political parties would not be more than the accredited number of voters. But if, for whatever reason, INEC, the human operators at INEC, decide to switch off that technology, and then you now have these results that are showing, very high numbers of voters accredited. The fault, I think, will have to be attributed to the human operators of the system and not to the technology. Now, the way I see the BVAS, it's like, I can compare it to a CCTV camera. It captures the fraud, but if you switch it off, then there's little or nothing it can do. And that's, I think, the noteworthy thing, in all of this.
Now, recently, the INEC chair actually did allude to, some lapses in the just concluded Edo polls. I would just like to read an excerpt of some of the things he said, verbatim. He said that we have learned a lot of lessons, not from the last election, but also from previous elections. Basically, there are 2 challenges. The first one is logistics for the election, so that polling units open promptly on the election day. The second one is result management. And my assurance to voters in Ondo State is that they are going to see fast improvement in these 2 processes. This is not the first time INEC is actually admitting and saying, what, we will do better, we will improve. I'd like you to speak on what the INEC chair said, particularly as regards these 2 challenges, logistics and voters or result management.
Well, from my experience, I think INEC has been doing well in terms of logistics, really? except for situations where there's some kind of disruption and so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to result management, I think the question we need to ask the INEC chairman is, to break it down. That's a very wide or vague comment. What is meant by result management? Now, the reports, and you mentioned the TAP initiative and Mr. Martins, and I think I watched a part of their expose, and we're talking about situations where there exist 2 result sheets bearing the same serial number, containing different results from the same polling unit. I think that that goes beyond result management. That goes beyond result management. There's something fundamentally wrong. That speaks to fraud. That speaks to fraud and inauthentic results. So I think that INEC needs to actually come clean to the Nigerian people. And just like I noted earlier, the third function of the BVAS, I keep emphasizing on that because it seems to be glossed over, by a lot of people, even the media and the press. That third function of the BVAS, I think, is perhaps the most important function because it is difficult to deny what you can see in plain sight. So when you have the results saying, 1,000 people voted, there's really nothing anybody can compare that to. But if the BVAS machine is also showing on the same site that it was only 50 people that were accredited in that polling unit, then at face value, that result saying 1,000 people is fraudulent. But we'll switch out the ability of the BVAS machine to report the accreditation figure. That's an important issue. And I think that INEC should be taken to task, on that issue, and it shouldn't be glossed over. So if the INEC chairman is saying that in the Ondo election, that function or that feature is going to be enabled, then that's what I would like to hear. Otherwise, we would like to understand what is meant by result management.
All right, Suala, let's go on a quick break. When we return, we'll definitely pick up from where we stopped. Stay with us. Many thanks for staying with us. This is still Politics HQ on News Central Television. And we still, of course, have our guest, Suala Jumbo, is the promoter of Nigerian Intellectuals Forum. He joins virtually from Port Harcourt, and we have been discussing, the fallout of the elections so far in Nigeria. I mean, looking at the recent Edo elections and also Bayelsa, in context ahead of the Ondo polls. Thank you for staying with me. Now, let's look at the involvement of other players in this election, because there seems to also be a lot of focus on INEC, which of course is normal, the umpire of the entire process. But there's also the role of political parties, there's the role of CSOs, and then more importantly, the voters, the general public. I would like to sort of be more specific on the role of political parties in all of this. Let's not even talk about the judiciary yet, but I would like your take. How do you think political parties can be made to be more accountable and responsible during this process? Because more often than not, when it comes to disruptions and you do your due diligence, it's traced to the activities of political parties, right? So how can they be more accountable using technology, in this process?
Well, now the technological aspect, I think, is more on the INEC front. Now, for opposition political parties, for example, I would say that they haven't really done well in the sense that they have not necessarily played their role. Now, well, I don't want to say proper societies because that would sound as if we're not a proper society. But in other places, you find opposition political parties, they do research and background studies and so on and so forth. The Bayelsa elections, for example, Imo State and Kogi, they're players who try to compromise the system. I would have expected perhaps the parties in Edo State to have learned the lessons of what transpired in Bayelsa and then preempted them in Edo State, and then raise some of these issues with INEC, for instance, like the issue I talked about, which is the real-time transmission of the accreditation figures from the polling units.
We saw the People's Democratic Party actually did raise some concerns. And if to that election, the governor of the state went to the INEC office in the state, alleging that some sort of shady, activity was going on there. And he went there, in the middle of the wee hours of the morning to raise these issues. And they've been pretty much vocal.
Yeah, but what you're doing then is you're crying over spilled milk. When the horses are voted, these are things that ought to have been done before the election. In other words, I'm saying that political parties can anticipate, where people want to compromise the system, the vulnerabilities that they will take advantage of, and then they can take action before the elections. You don't do those things during the elections, just like what you're describing. It's too late at that point, to make any meaningful impact. I gave, and I repeat, just this, example I've been hammering on, which is the ability of the BVAS machine to transmit in real time the accreditation from the polling units. Now, if that was done, it would be difficult for anybody to contest, or to argue that some of those results that you now want the public to believe, are bogus, are actually authentic results. It will be difficult to make that argument because anybody can then go on IREV and then see that this result that's saying 1,000 people voted only had 45 people accredited. But if you wait till you get to court, you wait till you get the BVAS report, it's already late at that point.
Before I let you go, I'd like to ask, Ondo election, governorship election is just around the corner. What specific improvements would you like to see, particularly in the areas of the BVAS, the IREF, technology basically, ahead of this polls, such that by the time the results are announced, it's crystal clear. And even if you choose to contest, it's pretty hard to know that, the entire process was transparent, technology was deployed, everyone can see, it's crystal clear what the winner is.
Yeah, so basically two things. The first is what I've been saying, the third function of the BVAS, which is the ability to report in real time the accreditation figure from the polling units to the IREV. That should be reinstated, because like I said, it was disabled after the Bayelsa, Imo, and Kogi elections. That should be reinstated. The second is the issue of cancellation of results. Now, the Electoral Act, the latest Electoral Act, says that results can be cancelled at any stage of the election. In other words, or rather than say cancelled, say maybe not collated, because the collation officer is to compare those results with the accreditation figures in the BVAS machine, which is the same figure I'm saying that the BVAS has the ability to transmit directly to IREV. Now, what I would suggest is that at the Central Collation Center, which for the governorship is at the state level, there should be a system or a procedure in place for political parties to be able to flag polling units where fraud has taken place, but where those results have been collated at other levels. In other words, at the ward level, at the local government level. But when you now come to the state level, there should still be the opportunity for political parties to flag those results. And then right there in front of all the participants, because the collation at the central level is the one that is usually divided to the whole of the country and all that. Right there in front of all participants, the collation officers can then compare what you have in those result sheets with the BVAS accreditation figure, which has been transmitted to IREV and which is also available to the collation officers at the collation center. And any result that does not tally with the BVAS accreditation figure should be stepped down immediately. So this issue of accepting fraudulent results should be a thing of the past. In Bayelsa State, for example, up till today on IREV, if you go on IREV, you will see fraudulent results that were not cancelled by INEC. Now, we agree that some were cancelled. Let's say about 50% of them were cancelled, but another 50% were not cancelled. Now, luckily, in quote, depending on which perspective you're looking at it from, luckily for the governor of Bayelsa State, those that were cancelled were enough to secure his victory. But we mustn't be at a stage where we are left to the mercy of INEC and which results they cancel and which they don't cancel. The system should be set up in a way that it is clear to everyone that this result ought to have been cancelled and then it is cancelled.
All right, Asue Ighodalo, promoter Nigerian Intellectuals Forum, thank you so much for your time on the program.
Thank you very much.